Welcome everyone back to another session of Decoded, where I get to dig into super interesting people's lives and find out how they do, why they do, and really what they do every day. And I have a very special guest because this is a friend of mine, one of my first friends in college about a bazillion years ago. And that is Mr. Kareem Montague, who everyone calls Monty. So thank you so much for joining us on this fun adventure of Decoded.
Oh, thanks for inviting me, Abigail. I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
Same here. You also happen to be a colonel in the U.S. Army. So many of us don't really know what that means. I mean, we know it sounds kind of interesting and up there and successful, but what does it mean to be a colonel in the Army? What is your job like?
As a colonel in the Army, there's a rank structure in the Army. You have enlisted soldiers and you have officers as well. So the enlisted ranks go from private all the way to sergeant major. Some would say from E1 to E9. Then you have warrant officers, WO1 to W5, Chief Warrant Officer 5. They're technical experts and also leaders in the Army. And then you have officer ranks from lieutenant all the way to 4-star general. And so that's O1 all the way to O10, although there aren't very many 4-star generals in the Army. And a colonel is an O6. So it's a relatively senior officer in the Army. So I'm, in addition to being a colonel, the other thing you'd want to know about me is that I'm an artillery officer, which means I have spent 25 years in the Army serving on various different types of artillery systems. Very simple term, artillery is indirect fire. So anything from, if you can imagine ancient times, from a bow and arrow all the way to an atomic bomb. As a matter of fact, there's a history of the artillery called From the Crossbow to the H-Bomb, a history of indirect fire.
Wow.
And so those are the sorts of systems that I serve on.
Yeah.
And right now, my job is even more interesting. I work for the Chief of Staff of the Army. I am responsible for his coordination group. So I'm not working in an artillery formation now. I'm in a staff position, and I'm responsible for the trip planners and the speech writers and the folks who are working the engagements that the Chief of Staff of the Army has. He's the senior officer in the Army and has a very critical mission as it relates to personnel and providing forces to combatant commands to prosecute conflict if that's required.
So just in layman or laywoman's terms,
sure,
the Chief of Staff is really like the organizer. Would you call him like the organizer of the duties and the people, and is he kind of more an operations type of guy?
He's the senior officer in the United States Army. So there are other 4-star generals who are in different positions, but interestingly enough, he's not a commander. We used to. In the old days, let's just say before Teddy Roosevelt, because that's when it changed, we had a commander of the Army who was the senior commander in the Army. But Teddy Roosevelt, with the Secretary of War at the time, Elihu Root, changed that structure so that it's the Chief of Staff. So he is the head of the Department of the Army Staff. And in the Department of the Army Staff, you have other leaders and general officers who are responsible for the soldiers in the Army.
Okay.
Recruiting. So you have an element that's responsible for personnel, that's responsible for intelligence, for operations, and the Chief of Staff of the Army sits up on top of all of that structure. He does a lot of engagement with the Army and engagement with units in the Army. He does a lot of engagements with our civilian leadership. So the Secretary of the Army, the Secretary of Defense, as well as with Congress.
And so what do you do vis-a-vis him? So you work for him.
I do.
In his team. What I know not team the way you guys call it team, but like in his sphere.
Sure, no, we actually do call it Team CSA 40. That's
really?
That's what we call our group of folks who are all together. So
what is it that you do in respect to him?
So I run what's called his coordination group. So there are a group of folks who, as you can imagine, a big part of being a leader at that level in any organization, not just in the Army, is communication. Sure. Communication to the force itself, communication outside the force, communication to industry, communication to the political leadership. And so in order to do that, you have to have folks who manage his schedule, who plan the trips that we take as a group. There are folks who are working on research, who are developing strategy on behalf of the Chief of Staff of the Army, who are writing speeches. And so I'm responsible for pulling all those folks together and directing those efforts, all in support of the Chief.
Got it.
So I
You know, I
still
remember you as my buddy, when my first buddies, you know, at Harvard and freshman year, and you were so nice. And, you know, I'd love for you to share how you went from being this English major to then getting a master's degree in operational arts to then, which I'm going to ask you about, like what that means, because it sounds cool, but I have no idea, then to becoming this, you know, big shot in the Army. So
again, just a regular staff guy, not a big shot, but sure.
I think you are. So like, how did that happen? What's the story?
No, it's a great question. So you know, as I was bumming around on campus, hanging out with you, one of the things that always weighed on me when we were at school is that, you know, one of the greatest gifts that my parents ever gave to me, and they've both since passed, is that they both had high school educations and came from very humble backgrounds. My dad was a New York City firefighter. My mom was she worked making chips essentially at IBM, and I grew up in that environment. But they never wanted to place any limits on me as an individual, and they always said, you know, as I started thinking about going to college, they said, "Hey, do you just figure out where you're going to get in, and we will figure out how to pay for it. Don't worry about it. It's a great thing. You've put in the work. You've done well. So don't allow that to be a stressor." And you know, that's a nice thing for someone to say, and I really appreciated that. But it still seemed like a significant burden to me when I was in school. It bothered me that my parents were contributing so much for my education, as awesome, as incredible as that education was. So I was looking for opportunities to relieve some of that burden from them. And there was a friend of mine, a friend of both of ours, Greg Lopez, who had discovered Army ROTC. So Greg had said, "Hey, it was in the Lowell House dining hall. You'll appreciate this."
Yeah.
He said, "I just went to this awesome event where you go out and you get to run around in the woods and it's awesome." And so I said, "You know what? That sounds like a lot of fun." And he goes, "No, by the way, if you really like it, you can apply for a scholarship and you get scholarship money to pay for your education."
Yeah.
So I said, I'm going to go check that out. And that's exactly what I did. I went the next day. I went to a class essentially for the Reserve Officer Training Corps, and over at MIT, and I fell in love with it the first day. And so for the next 2.5 years, I was in ROTC. I applied for a scholarship and was awarded a scholarship. So I had an Army ROTC scholarship for my last 2 years of college. And it meant that on the day before we graduated in June, I won't say which year, 1995, but when we graduated in June of 1995, the day before that,
2005. No.
Yeah, that's funny. The day before our graduation, I was commissioned. I was sworn in as an officer into the Army as a second lieutenant on the steps of Memorial Church. You know, where the next day we would watch our graduation speakers and all the pomp and circumstance that comes with graduation disconnected to me. My dad had served in the Navy when he was much younger. It was a very common route out of the ghettos of New York City to join a service. All of his brothers had served either in the Army or the Marines or in the Navy, and then he came back from that experience and joined the fire department in New York. So he was FDNY for 34 years. So the idea of service didn't seem that strange to me.
Right.
And I was deployed as part of the initial invasion in Iraq in 2003. Came back from there, went up to Fort Lewis, which is
wait. I got to stop you there.
Okay.
So how did you feel? Like, what was your feeling? I mean, I'm sure there's so many emotions, but like,
sure.
What was that like?
You know, it's interesting because you really get, you know, people always ask what combat is about. And the best way that I can describe it is that it creates a real hyper focus in you because you recognize that the things that you're doing, any mistakes that you make, anything that you don't pay attention to can have catastrophic consequences for you and for the soldiers to your left and right. So when I went to Iraq, that was we deployed initially in, would have been January of 2003. And so, it was a crazy time in my life. My wife was very pregnant. Was 2 in March of that year. I was a battery commander, which means I was in command of an organization of about 110 soldiers, an artillery battery. So I had howitzers, and we deployed our unit to Iraq. To Kuwait, excuse me. We spent 6 weeks or so in Kuwait, and then in March of that year, we crossed the border and we were involved in the fight, moving forces up to Baghdad. And got to Baghdad, spent a little while there, and then we were replaced by another unit, and then I came back. So, yeah, it was a very, very interesting, sort of surreal time, because if you think about it, your entire career in the military, you're training for that exact
Right.
potentiality. But
Those moments.
that's exactly right. But it's still really surreal when it actually happens. So,
Right. Right.
so the three of us, while my wife was deployed, moved to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, which most people associate with the prison. You hear about Fort Leavenworth and you hear
Right.
about Leavenworth, Kansas. But
Right.
a little known fact is that in addition to there being a military prison there, which actually doesn't have very many prisoners anymore,
Yeah.
the most significant thing that's on Fort Leavenworth is a school for the Command and General Staff College. It's the school where majors, which was my rank at the time, that's where we go to go to school to get continuing education. I spent a year at the Command and General Staff College. I was selected for a program called the School of Advanced Military Studies, which is where I got my first master's, and I was trained to be an Army planner. So in addition to my traditional job as an artillery officer, I picked up the additional skill identifier of an Army planner, which meant that if you'll notice, a lot of the jobs that I will have after that assignment, I am as likely to be doing planning as I am to be doing strictly artillery specific things.
Uh-huh.
And so that's where I got the master's degree in operational art that you had asked me about before. But
Got it.
I've had the opportunity to work at all of those levels. Work at higher headquarters working for the chief of staff of the Army now. I worked for the U.S. Army Pacific Commander when I was in Hawaii for a period of time. So lots of different opportunities to think of things at all different sorts of levels, if that makes
Sure.
sense.
Absolutely. So you have a diverse background. You studied English, as I mentioned before, at Harvard. You came from New York. You're a person of color. What do those affect your role? And have they colored your experience in the Army?
I think so, but I would say in I think is not strong enough word. Absolutely, I think
Yeah.
that the I think what makes it almost sounds like a really bad bumper sticker to say, but what makes the Army so strong is the diversity of the Army. The
Interesting.
fact that we have all of these people who come from all different sorts of walks of life, all different heritages. I mean, we have folks who come to the United States and before they are citizens, join the Army for the opportunity to serve the country and to become citizens in the country. It's really an amazing story if you think about it.
Yeah.
And so in that way, it's a real privilege. And you're right, my situation is very unique. In some ways, you could say it's a unicorn sort of situation.
Right.
There are not, the officer corps in particular trends more southeast and southwest than northeast. So that is interesting in of itself. I'm also the Harvard RTC program creates some incredible officers, but not very many.
Right.
The program is relatively small. In fact, I would like to see more officers commissioned out of Harvard. I think that would be fantastic. I think that there's a debt of service that at all of these elite schools, not just Harvard, that we owe to the nation. And I think the university recognizes as well. There was a big push, not for military service specifically, but a recognition that we needed more of our fellow alums to go into the fields of service, whether it's service in the nonprofit sector, service in government, as well as service in the military. And so, yeah, I think that all of those things have given me a really unique perspective and a unique voice, which I think is important in the Army. And,
How
you can
so?
only be.
What does that mean?
That's a great question. So I think that the reason why all the studies will tell you that diversity makes organizations stronger, counter to what a lot of organizations, they say that, but they don't practice it. I think that the way that I look at the world is different than the way someone else would look at the world. And when you put those two perspectives together, you get a clearer picture of what reality is.
Yeah.
And I also think that because I've had the privilege and the benefit of all of these different educational and academic experiences, it it positions me well to look at really different problem sets in a very unique way and come up with unique and interesting solutions for those problems.
And so, and the Army is accepting of those unique
Certainly.
solutions. Like they want that. They want that different perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the reason why I say, you kind of smile of like, of course, but there's so many organizations and so many cultures, corporate cultures in particular, that don't they may say they want diversity of opinion or of thought, but they don't necessarily know how to manage that and handle that. And it sounds like the Army, by virtue of being so big and being an institution for so long, has learned how to celebrate that.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to just paint it with rose-colored glasses. We're not without our challenges, like every other organization.
Right.
But I think that there's a recognition that the organization is so large that we have a need. The chief says this all the time. Every year, we have to bring in roughly 130,000 soldiers across all the components between reserve, guard, and active duty. So we have to continue to bring in folks who are passionate to serve, who want to have the opportunity to lead in the Army. And in order to do that, you have to have something that's appealing, that's drawing people to it. So if you were a really closed off organization and didn't appreciate the talents that people brought to the organization, then they would choose, and they would vote with their feet, as we say. They would
Right.
go and do other things.
Right. I have to ask, I'm a big proponent of really everyone harnessing their sense of creativity.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people think, well, creativity is kind of in the space of like, art or music. Or
Oh, absolutely not.
Right. So
Absolutely not.
talk to me, like, is creativity a necessity in the Army, and how so?
I think that it is. Just like everyone doesn't have a sense of humor, everyone doesn't have the same level of creativity. But the Army absolutely needs people who are creative, because you have to have folks who can look at problem sets that are new and novel that they've never seen before, and they have to be able to come up with unique solutions to those problems and be willing to take risk to get after those challenges. I'll give you an example. During the year that I was in my second year at Fort Leavenworth, I told you I was in the School of Advanced Military Studies where I got my master's degree. And jokingly, that school is called the Book a Day Club for the Army, where we read a lot. For the first several months of the course, you really do read a book each day, and you
That's
talk about
awesome.
it, and you talk about it in detail the
So
following
you were
day.
loving that.
Absolutely, very happy. I was very happy with that. Very happy with that opportunity. And so one of the books that we read very early on was, I'm sure people have heard of it. It's a book called Moneyball. And you're probably going, why would a bunch of Army guys? And it's not just Army. We had Air Force, Marines, we had Department of the Army civilians, Navy, all sorts of folks in this course. Why would they be reading a book about baseball? When if you dissect it, what Moneyball is all about is about how you can gain the competitive advantage in a traditional field or organization if you just look at the problem set in a different way. If you recognize that people are missing something that they've taken for granted for far too long, you can take that advantage. And I've always taken that same approach into things that I've done in the Army, because it's an institution that's older than the nation, that's existed for so long. If we're not careful, we can find ourselves stuck in a rut in the way that we do things. And so it's the opportunity of creative people to look at those and to push us in different directions.
Right. So all those different sides that you bring to the table, where you come from, your ethnic background, your family background, your studies at Harvard, your love for English literature, like all of that probably plays a role in helping you be the solution maker that you are, being the creative thinker that you are.
Well, I think so. I think it makes me the unique person that I am, just like everyone else has other skills and talents that they bring to the table. And it's also one of the things that I really love about serving in the Army is that there are folks who come into the Army from all walks of life. And whether it's, from the most humble of beginnings, and I'm not including myself, who come from incredibly humble beginnings, coming to this country with next to nothing. And they come into the Army, and it's not just what the Army provides to them in terms of that opportunity to be successful, but it's what they provide to the Army. Just the number of soldiers that I've met who, will say that, they for whatever reason, school never worked for them. They were just easily distracted. They didn't love going to school, so they couldn't imagine going to college. But they come into the Army, and something is sparked in them, something that they already had where the Army was the perfect match.
Yeah.
And they are leading soldiers doing incredibly amazing things. It's I think it's good for all of us if you have some time, don't just reserve it to Veterans Day and Memorial Day, but just read some of the histories of some of the most incredible heroes, Medal of Honor winners, Bronze Star, Silver Star winners in the Army, and just where they came from, and yet they were in the right place to take all of the unique talents and skills that they had for the benefit of their organization and for the benefit of the nation as well. It's super inspiring.
Yeah, it is. Well, I got to say, Monty, I'm super inspired. And in fact, I was almost going to invite my husband in to listen in because I know he would find this so cool. But, I think I learned a ton. Thank you. I could probably ask you more and more questions, but as a dad of 4, you probably need to go back and help them out, or at least read some of the books in the background that you have. But
I've got a varsity girls basketball game that I need to watch.
Yeah. Okay,
and make
so
some dinner.
Go watch. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to finally reunite in person.
Absolutely, Abigail. It's a real pleasure talking.